Fracking activists are waging a war against a corporate state that is deaf and blind to the rights of its citizens and the imperative to protect the ecosystem. The corporate state, largely to pacify citizens being frog-marched to their own execution, passes environmental laws and regulations that, at best, slow the ongoing environmental destruction. Corporations which routinely ignore even these tepid restrictions on them largely write the laws and legislation designed to regulate their activity. They rewrite them or overturn them as the focus of their exploitation changes. Corporations turn public hearings on local environmental issues into choreographed charades or shut them down if activists succeed in muscling their way into the room to demand a voice. They dominate the national message through a pliable and bankrupt corporate media and slick public relations. Elected officials are little more than corporate employees dependent on industry money to stay in office, and when they retire from, quote, public service, salivating for jobs in the industry. Environmental reform has become a joke on the public, and the big green environmental groups, as mainstream environmentalism, are complicit because they rely on donors at times from the fossil fuel and animal agriculture industries. The big green environmental groups are silent about the reality of corporate power, largely ineffectual and part of the fiction of the democratic process. Thank you for clearing that up to me, and then it goes on from there. At some point, he actually starts talking about fracking, but let's turn to the corporate media, which fortunately some of this takes a little bit of issue because, you know, I'm one of these guys. I'm not quite as down on the mainstream media as Chris Hedges is. Now, you do have to learn to pick and choose, but at least Yahoo News on its top 100 stories of the day every once in a while is a little bit honest, and their story today is the latest story on this, and that I haven't even mentioned, about the Barack Obama administration canceling oil leases in the Arctic Sea. Now I'm cheering on Barack, but I just haven't had time to do this rant. Well, you know, while I'm cheering on Barack Obama for canceling oil leases up there off the coast of Alaska, I knew from the moment I read it why he did it. Anybody who thinks that Barack Obama canceled those leases up there as part of his environmental legacy got one thing to tell you.
Bullshit level, DEFCON 5.
So we have to go to takepart.com. I like these guys. Takepart.com, breathing a little bit of honest reporting into what really went down up there last week. How Obama's two-year halt on Arctic drilling still leaves the waters in jeopardy. Yeah. So the U.S. Department of the Interior, what they did last week was they announced the cancellation of all remaining oil and gas leases in the Arctic Ocean through the year 2017. That means 55 million acres in the Chukchi Sea and 65 million acres in the Beaufort Sea are closed for business for now. And the department also rejected requests from Shell and the Norwegian oil and gas company to extend their leases by 5 years. So all that is good news. Now we get to the reason behind the good news. Although putting the brakes on Arctic drilling may be a win for the environment, the administration's decision seems to be financially motivated. The Interior Department's announcement cites, quote, market conditions and low industry interest, close quote, as its reasons for suspending exploration. It's that nobody would show up for these damn auctions after Shell abandoned its plans up there after spending $7 billion. This is one of those walrus huggers, Mr. Nodell. Quote, I think it is fair to assume that if oil prices were high and there were several competitive bids on the lease areas, the administration would have held the lease sales. Yes, they would have. But just because it makes economic sense doesn't mean environmental and wildlife groups don't have cause to celebrate, at least for now. But Alaskan waters and their inhabitants may not be safe for long. The Interior Department also has proposed 2 oil lease sales in the Arctic Ocean for the 2017 to 2022 offshore drilling program. There you go. So Barack Obama has once again kicked that one down the road, kicked that little inconvenient can down the road for someone else to inherit and figure out what to do with. All right, staying with TakePart.com. You know, what is going on down there in Australia? You know that little planet-eating maggot, Tony Abbott, is no longer in office. What's that new guy's name? Might be Greg Hunter. I'll find out here in a minute. So, this is the latest in that giant, massive coal mine down there in Australia that was approved by Tony Abbott and then shut down by Australia's Supreme Court. But guess what? Australia approves massive coal mine again. This gives you an idea of what an Australian coal mine looks like. Just 2 months after an Australian federal court threw out the government's approval of one of the world's largest coal mines because of its expected impact on an endangered snake and lizard, the country's environment minister has green-lighted the project again. So they found a way to save the snake and lizard.
Oh, come on now. That ain't even bullshit. That's horseshit.
But it's the rest of the planet, which they're not thinking about beyond this little skink. This decision means that the Indian-owned, this thing is owned by India, the Indian-owned Carmichael Mine in the state of Queensland is back on track to produce an amount of coal that, when burned, would exceed the annual greenhouse gas emissions of 52 countries. Over its 60-year lifetime, the mine could emit 128 million tons of heat-trapping greenhouse gases, according to Greenpeace. And environmentalists also fear the project will damage the iconic Great Barrier Reef, because to get all of the coal out of Australia and over to India, where it's heading, they need to pretty much bulldoze a channel through the middle of the Great Barrier Reef, build this big ass terminal on the coast of Queensland. Railways, highways, good God. This is Peter McCollum, one of those tree huggers down in Australia. Quote, Minister Greg Hunt's, that must be the environmental minister, Greg Hunt's reapproval risks threatened species, precious groundwater, the global climate, and taxpayers' money. There you go. So that's what's going on down there in Australia. But right here in our own country, what is the real estate development industry in bed with the Mormons up to? Right outside of Walt Disney World in the state of Florida. Don't get me on a Walt Disney World rant about what that real estate development did to the state of Florida. You know, Walt Disney, one of the biggest environmental criminals, certainly in the state of Florida, if not on the planet. Anyway, this one actually is just east of there. Development plans for Mormon cattle ranch stirs controversy. This is from a story from Associated Press talking about a 133,000 acre cattle ranch between Walt Disney World and the Kennedy Space Center. So right now it's a bunch of Mormons with their planet-eating cows down there. But pretty soon, this is the plans, the real estate plans for the sinking state of Florida. I was just looking at this map, should have done a rant on it, or what Florida is scheduled to look like in the year 2100 through these different scenarios. Good God Almighty! I guess what they're doing is just making a new place for the city of Miami to escape to. Desiree Ranch, Florida, one of the biggest land development plans ever proposed for the state of Florida. A tract more than 6 times the size of Manhattan could be transformed from a home for cows and alligators into new housing developments for 500,000 people. This is looking ahead towards the year 2080. 2080. Well, let me tell you, anyone making real estate development plans for the state of Florida for the year 2080, you got one thing to tell you.
Warning, bullshit alert.
Over the next 6 decades, the plan being developed by the Mormon church-owned Desiree Ranch promises to convert the largest undeveloped section of Metro Orlando into more than a dozen bustling neighborhoods. In the process, it would radically reshape Osceola County, a suburb that has been transitioning from cowboy culture into a major destination for Puerto Ricans moving to the mainland. Opponents say the plan to convert cattle pastures to cul-de-sacs would destroy tens of thousands of acres of important habitat near the headwaters of the St. Johns River flowing north and the Kissimmee River flowing south. They also worry that Osceola County has been doing the bidding of Desiree Ranch, one of the nation's largest ranches, as the county commissioners approved the ranch's plan unanimously in September.